especially in dorukhas such as these are actually even more prized than the Kani shawls, which are the real Jamawar shawls. And these shawls, the reason for that is that most of these, this is a single interlocked weave, whilst the Kani technique is a double interlocked weave. The single interlocked weave makes the piece a little lighter, so it is easier to wear. In fact, a lot of people find it a bit cumbersome wearing these big size shawls these days, which is why one of the reasons these became a bit out of fashion 100 years ago, because they became too heavy. But it's now people use them from a home decor point of view. They would use it as a throw, use it as a wall hanging. You could sandwich it between glass and use it on a dining table. So we'll start showing you some different examples. Normally these sizes are these large sizes are cut up into smaller pieces. So this particular piece has been made from a long shawl. It has been cut, and the rust colored side borders are all new. They could be 30 years, 100 years old, but they have been attached later, whilst that piece is a early 19th century Terekdar Dorukhi shawl. This has a different, if you see the flowers here, this is the iris flower, which is also another very famously grown flower in Kashmir. The dyes are all natural colors. So these are dyes that they make are all vegetable colors. So they make for brown they use walnut. For the blue, this is a natural indigo blue. Indigo is actually one of the most famously grown plants in India. So this is a very good example of a beautiful indigo color. When we talk of dyes, the dyes are extracted out of plants. Natural dyes are extracted out of plants, rocks, minerals, stones, sometimes even insects like cochineal and lac, where you have to kill like a few thousand insects which grow on barks of trees. And for all you vegetarians here, I am so sorry to break that news to you. The quality of dyeing of vegetable dyes as opposed to newly made chemical colors is very different. Chemical dyes came into into shawl weavings or in clothing in the early 1860s. I think 1865, if I am not wrong. The difference with chemical dyes or aniline dyes is that the colors in chemical colors is very straight. There is no variation in color. It is very uniform. Whilst in vegetable dyes, you will see the colors to have gradations within a same color, and that causes a gradation which gives a feeling of movement in the piece and makes the piece look three-dimensional. This is another type of Kani weaving technique, and these are small pieces that have been cut from larger size shawls, and of course the side ends are attached that are new. These are again garden patterns, and because of the styling that has been done, it's very apparent that it's made for the European market, because you see a certain amount of European influence in it. So these were made in the early 1800s for export to France. This is also from the same area. This is from the early 1800s again. Very unusual green color. This is made out of saffron dye, and it's the all over flower pattern again. This is also another example of the same type. Look at the quality of the turquoise color. This is from Punjab, and actually something similar we've seen in very famous collections and books. It's a very rare piece again. A lot of the times these colors start fading, like this is 200 years old, so the colors do start fading a little bit. Like you see, there's a shade band here where this strip of color is different from the other strip, and this happens over a period of time because they use wool from different batches of wool. The color is not consistent. This happens in natural dyeing. So this is another example of this style of weaving. Then there is another technique of weaving which is called the Suzani. Suzani is actually a shawl where you make a shawl like how it is done today. Like this is a typical, this is called a tafta pashmina, which is a tight type of pashmina weave. This is from the early 1900s, and this also has another type. So in this you make the fabric which is made out of hand spun, hand woven yarn, and the warp is also this side is called the warp. The length of it is called the warp, and then you make on a hand loom, you have a shuttle that goes up and down through the shawl, and so you have this shawl which is hand embroidered then with silk. This is another different weaving technique. It's called the Suzani technique. So you have, this is a handmade tafta pashmina with hand embroidery. Now in some of the older shawls, if you want to see and evaluate quality, you have to see that the thread count of the yarn should be very fine. The finer it is, the closer it is to each other, where you can see lesser of the fabric. It shows that the weaver is a better skilled weaver. Also, when you turn the shawl from the front side to the back side, the embroidery is almost the same. This shawl would take roughly around a year to embroider, although it just seems like a very thin sort of border. But if you look at the quality of the embroidery, it's a very delicate embroidery. All of these sort of shawls take anywhere between 6 months to 2 years to make. I'm sorry?
And one pair of eyes.
And you may lose some eyesight, you know, if you do it over a period of time. It's also a very difficult art form because your eye is focused on one area for, you know, like a square inch of area for a long period of time. So it's now becoming more and more difficult to do embroidery, especially now we make new shawls today, and the quality of embroideries have gone down enormously compared to how they were done 200, 300 years ago. Now this is again it's called a purmatan, which is an all over pattern. That means that the whole shawl has been embroidered. So these typically the embroideries were either a small beldar. Beldar means like a half an inch or a quarter of an inch embroidery which is done all over. Then you have the palladars, which mean that you could have anywhere between a 4-5 inch to a 7-8-9 inch embroidery done on both the pallas. This is called a palla, and comes from this, you know, the ladies here wear the saris where the thing is called a pallu, the end. So it's very similar. And again, this is made for the European market. You see the styling, it's very decorative. This is also another different weaving technique done in pashmina wool. The foundation and that means the warp threads are also pashmina, and the weft is also pashmina. Some of these shawls very rarely survive, like the first two or three examples I showed you earlier, the dorukas. Those are not very durable because a lot of them used to have silk that was mixed with pashmina to get it a little bit more luster and sheen, and silk actually is not a very durable fiber. So after 100 years or 60 years, silk starts breaking and tearing, and that's why you don't see that many examples of very good dorukas, but these were in mint condition.
What is the difference between this style of dorukas and the earlier one?
Yes, that's a good point. This is a different doruka technique. In those dorukas, which were a little older period, that is, we are talking of the first half of the 19th century, those dorukas which were done in Punjab were first hand woven in the kani technique and then embroidered, whilst these ones are just hand embroidered with a needle, and the embroidery is doruka, that means it is double sided from both sides, but it is only done without the kani technique in these types.
In terms of the value of the shawl, does it matter what base it is, like if it's pashmina or wool on these embroideries?
Yes, of course it would. I mean, pashminas obviously have a much higher premium. They used to also use shatush, which comes from an antelope, where you have to kill the antelope, and now it's banned. You know, you can't trade in shatush anymore. It's under the Wildlife CITES treaty, where most countries are signatory to. So shatush shawls would obviously demand a much more premium than, let's say, pashminas, and then as compared to wool, wool is of course not very desirable, because pashmina was at least what you should have. And also the embroideries vary, you know, like it's a very important question, because when you do the embroidery, if I was to do an embroidery on a shatush, the cost of embroidery, let's say hypothetically, I'm throwing figures at you which may not make sense, but let's say if they were 1,000, a pashmina would be 300, and on a wool the embroidery would be 20. It's that much of a difference. if you were to put it proportionately, that so it's very important when you see embroideries, what is the fabric the embroidery has been done on, like what you were showing me earlier, that is done on very coarse quality wool, and the embroidery is also not very fine. So it, you know, when you, it would not hold importance. If the, even if the embroidery was coarse and done on a pashmina fabric, then it still had some sort of value. Now this is a museum quality piece. This is from Ranjit Singh ji's time. This has actually come from a collection from one of the Maharajas here, which Uncle Sheel acquired about maybe 15 years ago, and I had the pleasure of buying it with him. This is also one of the most exquisite pieces you'll ever see. You have the different panels. This is a bit like some of the prayer shawls that were made. If you see, there's a niche, the mihrab, that is made on the border areas, and you have the gardens of paradise. So you have the in the border you have a tree of life design. The tree of life is supposed to symbolize harmony between the three worlds: humanity on the ground, birds that fly in the sky, and what lies beneath the ground. The border here is woven, and then it's hand embroidered with a needle. This is another very exquisite piece. If you can see the detail of the drawing, it's just very beautifully made. The balance and symmetry of the piece, we haven't had it restored. The side ends that Gaurav is looking at, this is all original, but we've left it in the original condition. Some shawls, you know, that are museum, we let them be as they are. If we find that a shawl can be reused, and this can actually be reused, but this would make a stunning wall hanging as well. It's very rare. This is late 18th century. If you look at the back of this shawl, see the lining of the shawl. This is the original lining that was done. Sometimes the linings are as pretty, or you know, are really beautiful as well. This is a very simple sort of pattern. Again, a hand woven fabric, beautifully done.